concentration of people. Chicago's great 19th century innovation was the skyscraper. Okay? Chicago attracted an enormous amount of architectural talent after the Great Chicago Fire of 1871. A lot of smart people building together, learning from each other, and they created this amazing thing of the steel load-bearing skeleton. There's a healthy architectural literature on who's the father of the skyscraper, the title commonly given to William LeBaron Jenney for the home insurance building in 1884. The problem is the home insurance building only has two walls that have steel-bearing skeletons, and some other buildings had it first. And there were steel skeleton buildings going back decades earlier. The truth of the matter is there are about 10 people who were involved in inventing the skyscraper, all of whom stole each other's ideas in Chicago, all of whom worked with each other, all of whom educated one another. And it's a chain of innovation that sort of starts with Jenney and his contractor Peter B. White, and goes to Daniel Burnham, and goes to Louis Sullivan, and goes to Root, and goes to Adler, and goes to Frank Lloyd Wright, all of whom are learning from each other and riffing each other and creating both engineering marvels and also a new idiom, a new architectural idiom for building. All of this same stuff comes out of the combinations of smart people in cities. Okay, so you have got these cities that are about simple transportation cost advantages that do amazing things. And then you get hit by the 20th century. This is the change in the real cost of moving a ton of mile by rail in the 20th century. It's more than a 90% drop. So whereas in 1900 it was fairly expensive to move goods over space, in 2000 it became very, very cheap. And these cities that formed because they had waterways and then railroads that complemented them became largely obsolete in the business of moving goods. So 7 out of the 8 largest American cities in 1950 were over-concentrated in manufacturing. By 1990, 6 out of the 8 largest American cities were under-concentrated in manufacturing. All of these good producing units left because it was just cheaper to do it elsewhere. And you didn't have to pay for the high urban costs, and you could suburbanize your manufacturing plant. Henry Ford was one of the early movers of this in his River Rouge plant outside of Detroit. And first they moved to suburbs, then they moved to low-cost states, and then, of course, manufacturing leads the U.S. whatsoever. Because it just doesn't make sense to pay for the cost of putting large land-intensive manufacturing plants in cities. And as a result, you get this tremendous shift in American population. So freeing people up in terms of no longer needing to be located on the Great Lakes system means you have a move to warm cities. No variable predicts which American city has grown better over the past 100 years than January temperature. Decade in and decade out, Americans have moved to warm places. Of course, this has also been aided by, let's call it, heat bias technical change, if you like. Things like air conditioners and public health innovations, which made it possible to live in warmer states. Then you have the move from high-density areas to low-density areas. This is the accommodation to the car, right? America has, every one of the large American cities built after 1940 has been designed around the automobile, and you feel it when you go there, right? Whereas the older cities are built around public transportation or even walking, right? Cities always reflect the dominant transportation technology in the era in which they were built. And in the late 20th century, that means the car. And it's very, very difficult and costly to retrofit cities built around public transportation and walking to the automobile. Think about the billions, the close to $20 billion spent on the Big Dig in Boston. That's an attempt at retrofitting, and it's very, very difficult. Much easier to build a city in the middle of the desert that's just a de novo built around advertising. This is the thing that hit cities in the 1970s. But then New York, Boston, San Francisco come back, London come back. And they come back around idea-oriented industries. And in some sense, it's exactly the same thing we saw in the skyscraper in Chicago or in linear perspective in 15th century Florence. But this time, it's no longer a sideshow. This time, it's the main event. Right? Florence was a wool and banking city. The fact that it had some nice painters there was irrelevant for the basic economic functioning of the place. Okay? The fact that New York has a riff of ideas and finance was the central event, right, in Manhattan's economy over the last 30 years, right? In the 2007 census, county business patterns, 42% of Manhattan's payroll was in finance and insurance, right? This is what they do. And if you think about the things that enabled finance to become so large, it's again a chain of ideas. And it's a chain of ideas that I think starts with a better understanding, or seeming understanding at least, of how to trade off risk and return. At least they thought they knew how to do it better. And this starts actually often in the academy. It then moves to increasingly practical places, and then people start riffing on this. So once you sort of figure out how to trade off risk and return, then you can sell riskier assets. And this is Michael Milken selling high-yield debt in New York in the early 70s, then moving to Beverly Hills. It's the use of those riskier assets that Michael Milken can sell to then get more value out of corporate America. So think about Henry Kravis and leveraged buyouts. Again, it's one innovation playing on the other. It's the selling of mortgage-backed securities to, share the risk from individual banks to throughout the world. There's actually an interesting lesson with the mortgage-backed security mess, which is in part it's a failure of this idea to deliver long-run value, right? In some ways, but it's also a way of reminding us of how much knowledge is involved in face-to-face. Much of the problem with mortgage-backed securities is long-distance, purely automated lending, sort of taking out the human element of thinking through this thing. And it's sort of a sign of the continuing importance of actually meeting face-to-face. And then as a final riff, think about Mike Bloomberg selling data tools. And think about the sort of incredible, thing that Mike Bloomberg did, which is he's an information technology entrepreneur, but he's someone who actually sells the information that traders want. And he has that knowledge because he's run the trading floor at Salomon Brothers. And when he gets fired from Salomon Brothers in 1981, he moves into a related industry. He carries an idea from one industry to the other and figures out how to turn it into an enormously profitable business. Again, it's sort of, cities enabling people to borrow ideas from one industry and shape it again. And this is not a sideshow anymore. This is the main event. And the ability of cities like New York and Boston to continue surviving depends upon their continuing ability to generate new ideas. These are facts that go along with these stories. So if you want to understand which American cities have done well, apart from sunshine, okay, you want to look at skills. And you can look at, skills in 1970, you can look at the presence of land-grant colleges prior to 1940 if you feel like you're interested in a little more causality, or you can, go back to the occupational mix in 1880. They all predict which cities have done well over the past 30 years. This is changes in income and the share of skilled workers.